So a quick recap of Sprint. We spoke about this last week. Day one, the goal is really to start at the end objective. That's your long-term goal. To map out the customer journey, user journey, to talk to experts and get their thoughts and opinions, and to come up with interesting how might we questions, which then allows you to pick a target how might we problem to solve, which is what we're going to focus on today. You're also going to have a separate sprint session with sprint facilitators in the next couple of weeks. So we'll have that organized as well. So just to keep in mind, this is not the full sprint, which we're going to cover today. You're going to do that through an online workshop separately and build a solution to test. But the goal of today really is to pick the problem to solve, right? And so for a lot of you, you've already identified a target market and have already picked your problem to solve. This is really to get you to go through that mapping exercise and make sure you're solving the right problem, and that's really a big one, because if you get the problem right, that's half the battle won there. All right, so now your day two, which is Tuesday, is where the team sketches solutions. Your day three is where you decide on the solution and storyboard it, right? So you're picking the best solution that's come out of day two and coming up with a more detailed storyboard to it. Your day four, Thursday, you prototype and build a solution. Sprint has some great recommendations with software to use from a prototyping standpoint. And then finally, day five, Friday, is where you test your solution and see customers' reaction and learn from it, right? So that's a quick recap of what we spoke about last week. The sprint facilitators will get into a lot more detail with the sprint process and the rest of the week, really, but I'm going to focus on just the selecting of the target problem today, and take you guys through that with a couple examples and maybe work on one or two of your ventures who are happy to volunteer. All right, so to start with, you're really coming up with an objective, right? So you're setting a long-term goal. Where do we want to be 6 months, 1 year, or 5 years from now, depending on your time frame and kind of what you're looking to learn from your customer. So you list out initial sprint questions that you have. So to meet our long-term goal, what has to be true, right? So the book has an example from Blue Bottle Coffee that had physical coffee shops and were looking to launch a website to sell coffee, right? And so one of the things that they thought must be true in order to sell coffee is that customers would have to trust their expertise with respect to coffee, right? And it's very different from a physical store in a particular neighborhood where you're well known, you've built your brand, versus going online and having customers try to shop from you from a much larger geographical sort of area, right? And so that was point number one, that can customers trust them? Their point two was, all right, so what questions do we want to answer in the sprint, right? And so one of the questions that came up was just asking that what has to be true in the form of a question, right? So will customers trust our expertise? And so we'll work through this for our particular ventures. The third kind of very important thing is if you think about traveling into the future and think about the project having failed, this is actually a pretty useful exercise, and then coming up with what are the various things that may have caused that failure, right? And if you can think through that, then you can potentially avoid some of those pitfalls that you might have. Any questions here, or can I keep going? All right, so next you make a map, which is basically your map of your key stakeholder journey, right? So it's not just a user journey, but it's your key stakeholders. So you start with listing the actors on the left, right? So those are your key stakeholders. It might be more than just your user. Sometimes your user is not your buyer, and so you might have a separate user, a separate customer. You might have various stakeholders within the process that are part of that map, right? Then you're really going to your completed end goal, and that goes on the right of your page, right? So here's where you think about the various outcomes that might be the case for your target user, right? So if we uh, can have a volunteer here, we can talk about uh, what good and bad outcomes might look like. Does anyone want to volunteer for an example? Don't have any volunteers today?
I can volunteer, but I didn't really understand the second thing. So list my stakeholder and then?
Stefania, thanks for volunteering. So if you think about what you're trying to solve, right? Is
Yes.
if you can recap for the rest of the listeners what your problem is and what you're trying to solve, and we'll start from there.
Oh, okay. Sorry. So the problem we're trying to solve is to allow people to invest sustainably.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So allow people to invest sustainably, right? And so last time we spoke about narrowing your segment from people to be a little more specific, right? So
yes, and we did. So we cut off the 40, 50 years old. We're just focusing on the millennials, so the people who were born, when. And with that in mind, then we actually have a beachhead, which is actually people who are between 25 and 32. 26, 32, yeah.
25 to 32-year-olds. Is that what you said?
Yes. Yes.
Perfect. All right.
That's the beachhead. So we have a vision, which is all the millennials, and then the beachhead is just 25, 32.
Perfect. All right. So now if you were to think about if they use your solution or product, what's a good outcome for them?
That they have found a good and easy way to invest and make an impact.
All right. So to me, the way I would view that is that they get a good or a reasonable financial return that meets their mandate. So it could be market returns. So if you're positioning to provide market returns with a positive impact for them to get both, right? So financial return plus social impact, that would be the
yes.
positive outcome. Agree?
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. And in terms of a negative outcome, what might that look like?
A negative outcome might be that we don't really communicate well our message, or we don't really reach out to the right people.
So that's something that might lead to a negative outcome, but just the end goal, if we just simplify it and just stick with the end goal, is that these set of customers, or actually investors in this case, will not get a reasonable financial return along with social impact, right? And so those can be your final sort of end completed goal, which is positive, and then an outcome which is not positive, right? And then you can draw out a map that leads to either outcome. One of the things that may like you correctly said, is that if they don't understand the messaging, they might not appreciate the fact that they're getting a positive social impact as well, and so might not choose to invest. Right. So, but what we'll do is we'll go through the example in sort of greater detail. What I wanted to point out is basically your positive as well as negative outcomes are important to consider when you're thinking about the current user journey, right? So if you think about what that journey looks like for these investors today, and how they go about investing their money and what sort of outcomes that leads to, right? So it might lead to a satisfied investor that gets both positive financial return as well as social impact, or it might lead to a dissatisfied investor that is not able to find the right sustainable investment. So I'd even throw out one more outcome, which is the fact that maybe they cannot find a sustainable investment option that they're interested in because it doesn't exist today, right? The third might be that they get they get information on financial return, but they don't get information on their impact. Or the fourth might be that in order to have a positive impact, they have to give up a tremendous amount of financial return, which does not work for them either, right? So if you think about the sort of various outcomes that can lead um to various paths that are not optimal for your investor, right? And then really focus on that outcome that you want to get them to, and create a path to a certain extent to get them there, right? So we'll go through this, um, but thank you for that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. All right. So the next is really make a flowchart showing how customers interact with your product. That's if you have a product already. But if you don't have a product, for the existing user journey, how does the user go through the current process, right? Which is really what we're trying to learn about more here, to come up with going from a target customer that we've narrowed down a segment to really defining that particular pain point that we want to solve for them, right? And so what does that journey look like today for an investor that is uh, considering sustainable investments but might not have the means and the tools to be able to invest, and maybe even attractive options to get a high financial return with a high social impact. Yeah. The last point being, at this point you're really looking to keep it at a very high level, right? You're trying to understand the user journey, from a macro viewpoint, right? So without getting into a lot of depth, so about 5 to 15 steps, but that explains what the process is, which allows you to dive in deeper. All right. So an example from the book is from Flatiron Health, and this I put together using real-time board, which I'll share with you guys. It's a tool that you can use and to collaborate, and it actually integrates with Slack as well. So it's something that you as a team can use to come up uh, with what your user journey looks like, and actually picking how might we use that might be interesting to solve for, right? So here, Flatiron was trying to come up with a way to increase clinical trial enrollment, right? And so they started with understanding the problem and came to learn, obviously, there's three key stakeholders. There's a patient, there's a doctor, and then there's a coordinator, right? And uh, the regular process is that the patient makes an appointment. The doctor, along with the coordinator, searches for matching trial opportunities, and then the doctor discusses with the patient. And if there's a match, the patient enrolls, and then thereafter starts therapy, right? And if you can think about it, obviously a doctor's time is very, very valuable, right? And they don't have a lot of free time. And so for them to really go through this process and do a great job, to be effective, as well as sort of efficient, and to have that a higher success rate with enrollment matches was something that was not currently happening, right? So this is what Flatiron Health was trying to solve for. And they went through a sprint in order to do it. This was their first map that allowed them to understand the problem as a whole. Shall I keep going?
Suraj, a little confused with that particular step.
Yeah, sure.
If you don't mind, just sharing another example.
Yeah, so we're going to go through an example from from our incubator program in just a couple minutes. So if you can bear with me and if I just sort of finish the points and summarize what's in the book, and then we'll get into examples.
Yep.
Sounds good?
You bet. Sounds good.
Okay, so the next part of the process is to speak with experts and to take how might we notes, right? And so here you're going from that to really coming up with how might we's, which are how might we solve a particular problem, right? So the goal of talking to experts is to understand the gaps in the current solution or the current process, right? Which then allows you to identify key opportunities that you can solve for and frame it as a how might we question. So the book has an example from Blue Bottle Coffee again, where the team was really looking to create a customer experience that delighted customers the way that they get delighted going to a physical coffee shop, right? And so their key question, sort of one of the questions that they came up with was, how might we make the site like a friendly barista, right? Which is obviously not very easy to do, but this is the sort of experience that they wanted their website to have. And so if you think about various aspects of the user journey and think about where their customer experience is not optimal. So it could be that there's an existing solution to a pain point or a problem they have, but that the customer experience associated with that solution is not great, right? And that provides a how might we opportunity as well. If you can come up with a better way of doing that from a customer experience standpoint, that could be an interesting one as well. All right. So the goal of the talking to experts and how might we's is that as a team you actually take notes yourself, right? So you're listening to a bunch of people. You're coming up with interesting how might we opportunities and taking each one down on a sticky note, which you can then use to actually organize later, right? And so then as a group, you have a whole set of group notes, which can be organized using sticky notes, and you pick the ones that are the most interesting through a voting process, right? And the standout notes basically provide you an opportunity to solve a key customer pain point. And the book goes on, so we'll get into selecting the how might we, which is really what we're trying to use disciplined entrepreneurship as part of the process to help you select the how might we that can give you the best results, right? So going to the next part of the example is the team at Flatiron Health came up with a bunch of how might we's, right? So how might we get the doctor's attention to try to increase trials matching, right? The second one was how might we structure key info? Third one was how might we flag progression? So a bunch of how might we's, right? And then they got into selecting a target how might we. So here's where we think using disciplined entrepreneurship adds a ton of value. There's a great beachhead selection process, which can be applied to even the particular customer pain point and priority that you're solving for, which is what a how might we is, right? So you pick a how might we to say how might we delight customers and replicate the coffee shop experience using a website. Stefania's how might we might be how do we make sustainable investing more accessible to this target group of investors that's 25 to 32-year-old, right? And that's just one how might we, but if you go through the process of ranking them and sort of using a structured framework and criteria to rank them, that then allows you to quickly assess which is the most attractive opportunity, which as Sprint, I think it's also very effective. There is a decision maker that takes that call. Once that person gets inputs from the voting process as to what the team thinks is more attractive, right? But this framework basically allows you to put more structure around it. One of the things that we learned from our first program was that going into this process, most teams had different priorities and solutions that they wanted to work on. So essentially, they started with a particular problem. They came up with a target customer. And then within that customer segment, they thought that there were multiple attractive opportunities, right? And so going from there to consensus was actually not easy without the Beachhead selection criteria process, right? But what the Beachhead selection criteria process did was allow them to rank their most interesting how might we opportunities using a set of criteria. And very quickly we found that as soon as they did that, the entire team and three teams really all quickly agreed on what the problem is to solve, right? So it really brings a lot more structure to the selection of the problem, which we think is a big one, because if you get the problem to solve right, you've made a lot of progress towards solving a key pain point, which allows you to create a sustainable business, right? So one of the things from Sprint, which is important to add here, is that once you've selected a target, right, take a look back at your Sprint questions to ensure that they actually align with one or more, right? So you'd come up with a target goal, you'd listed Sprint questions, which was what you want to learn from the Sprint, right? And so you're now making sure that the how might we that you've selected allows you to learn what you set out to do, right? And actually just make sure that that you're in sort of alignment with your long-term goal, and that you learn something from going through this process that is meaningful. And so this is just the Flatiron team selecting that they want to focus on helping the coordinator search for matching trials, right? And so this is the how might we that they came up with, that they thought was the most exciting and the largest opportunity to increase the success rate of client enrollment. All right, so let's take a look at an example from our first incubator program. And what I actually wanted to spend a little bit more time on was a couple of examples from your ventures and show you a toolkit that you can use to go through this process, right? But I'll quickly go through this one example. One of our teams from the first program was working to come up with a solution to combat human trafficking. Now, this is obviously a very large and complex problem, but they went from that to then identifying that they wanted to focus on combating sex trafficking, which is a large part of the problem. And they spend time talking to various sort of NGOs to learn about the problem. They spoke to survivors to learn about the problem, and mapped out what a typical sex trafficking journey looked like, right? And this is obviously very simplified, but what the simplified journey of someone that gets into sex trafficking and how they get into it allowed them to then brainstorm how might we's to come up with solutions that could help combat the problem, right? And so this is their stepwise journey of what that looks like typically. They then went on to split how might we's in 4 categories. The first one being prevention, second one being awareness about sex trafficking, third one being about rescue, and fourth one being about rehabilitation, right? And so within each category, they came up with how might we's that they thought could help contribute to solving the problem. They agreed as a team, as they learned more, that there were a bunch of nonprofits that were already doing very good work in each of these segments that they'd mapped out. And what they found was lacking or missing was was really a platform to let people know about existing resources that exist already, right? And so the how might we that they thought would have the largest impact was how might we inform survivors, parents, researchers, and nonprofits about the various resources already existing out there. And so that's what they chose to focus on.
Hi, Suraj. It's Denise.
Denise, hi.
Thank you very much for raising this. I think it's wonderful. So, I understand the how might we statement example here, and that's great. Is the problem statement lack of awareness on human trafficking, or is it the lack of a platform where all the actors, especially nonprofit and civil society organizations, what they're doing on this issue? I'm just wondering, was the problem statement the lack of knowledge and capacity, or was it the lack of cohesion between the actors?
So it was really the former, right? So if someone is to learn about the problem today, when you're trying to find information about it, right? So if you're a donor that wants to understand that if you want to help combat trafficking, where should you give money? That's not an easy thing to do today, right? And so, but what the team found is that there are really good nonprofit organizations that are having a positive impact, but it's just from an awareness and from an information gap standpoint, right? There's just a little bit of an information gap here, that there are a bunch of players doing great work helping solve the problem, sort of cross categories from prevention to rescue to rehab, right? And how do you let someone that that needs help, or that wants to learn about the problem, or that wants to donate to fight the problem, to allow them to find the right resources to be able to do so, right? And so really what they found is that the problem was the information gap that they were trying to solve for a donor. That would be around awareness, right? For someone that needs help, it could be getting the right resources, again, but just an information gap issue. They were not trying to bring these various players together, but that would be an added benefit of creating a platform that brings common organizations, like-minded organizations together to maybe more holistically try to solve the problem. So I agree with you there. Yeah.
And whoever did this, they forgot Know the Chain and End Modern Slavery Now, which are like the two big ones. Just throwing that out there. Thank you.
Got it. Thanks. Yeah, this was their sort of preliminary work, but thank you for that.